Everyone. There we go. Welcome to the February Tale Spinners. My name is Dana Sherry. I'm here on behalf of myself and my co-host Liz Nichols, and it is a delight to welcome you. And our feature teller this evening is the inimitable Bob Canigus. Bob has been telling stories for over 30 years. He has been exploring the intersection of traditional tales and daily life. And I think many of us have benefited from your wisdom, from your joy, from your delight in the world and the stories that come to us. And I let you in one of your descriptions, you noted that you are living with a terminal case of story fever. And so I think I'm hoping that you never recover from storytelling fever. And I think that it is contagious. And so I invite you to share the fever with us this evening. So thank you.
Oh, thanks, Dana. Thank you for asking me to come back to my old stomping grounds. Uh, yeah, the only way to get relief from story fever is to pass it on to someone else. So I thought that I would just start with a very
Oops. I think, I, let's see, Bob, I think you got muted, and I wonder if we can get everyone who is not telling to mute
uh,
as well. There's a little bit of background noise. Okay, thank you. And
should I start again? So again, just thanks for inviting me to come back to my old stomping grounds. For those of you who don't know me, my wife Liz and I lived in El Cerrito for 13 years, and before we came to New Mexico. So back when Jerry Brown was calling himself a recovering politician, you may remember that he had an organization called We the People in Oakland at his house in Jack London Square. He convened a group of people who were interested in studying Martin Buber's book, I and Thou, but you had to pass muster to be part of this group that met for 12 weeks, had dinner, and then line by line went through I and Thou. So my friend Tom and I went to basically have our admission test, and Tom went up to Jerry first, and he said, hello, I'm Tom. What do you do, Tom? Asked Jerry, and he said, well, I'm a philosopher. And immediately Jerry Brown started to grill him. Where do you start? Do you start with Plato? How do you teach the cave? What about Descartes? And I was waiting to have my interview, so to speak, and wondering what he was going to ask me. So I thought I better do a preemptive strike. So I just stuck out my hand. I said, hello, Governor Brown. My name's Bob Canigus. I'm a storyteller, and I begin with Once Upon a Time. So once upon a time, about a million years ago, there was an eruption of a super volcano not far from where we live here. It was 150 times more powerful than St. Helens. All these years later now, magma from that eruption is heating these wonderful, wonderful hot springs about an hour drive from here. And just about 10 years ago now that we were getting ready to get into the springs. And we had one other person who was there. He turned out to be a Bhutanese monk. And it was so wonderful to talk with somebody who came from the land where they measure not gross national product, but gross national happiness. And we had this wonderful, wide-ranging conversation. And one of the things I asked was how the oral tradition was going in Bhutan. And Lama T said, "Oh, it's going strong. When I was a kid, when we used to have a town crier that shouted the news from the hilltops. I had to go to the village well with my sister, my older sister, and she said that if I carried the water back from the well, she would tell me a story at night. So I always carried the water. Now, I think that probably many of you know a story called The Cracked Pot. It's about a water carrier who I'm not going to tell the story, but the bones are that two pots that sat on either side of the water carrier's yoke after long service were talking about their life and their work. And one had a little crack, and he felt terrible that his water had leaked out. And but his elder brother told the crackpot that that water that had leaked was watering flowers by the side of the road. So, so I told that story to Lama T, and he said, "Oh, he said that's a wonderful story. I have to call my sister in Bhutan." And so, after hearing all the stories about the sort of the life not on the 24-hour news cycle, he got on his cell phone, and it was almost midnight, and he called his sister and told his sister that story. And she said, "Well, maybe your new friend would enjoy reading a book of Bhutanese folk tales. It's the first collection of Bhutanese tales written in English. And maybe he would really enjoy our national story of Mimi Haley Haley." So I thought I'd start by telling that story. Now in Bhutan, as I understand it, you start stories not with "once upon a time," but with "Dongbo Dingbo." Dongbo Dingbo. Now, if you say it shortly, like "Dongbo Dingbo," it was a while back. If it's "Dongbo Dingbo," that might be way, way back in the dream time. So "Dongbo Dingbo." Mimi Haley Haley, old grandfather Haley Haley, was not too fond of work. He was good natured, but one day there was just no getting around it. There was an old stump in a field that he needed to plant his spring barley. And so he began to work and chop and grunt and groan and chop and rest and wipe his brow. And after some time, finally, the stump tipped over. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. An enormous turquoise, a turquoise worth a king's ransom. And Mimi Haley Haley struggled to pick it up, thinking, I'm rich, I'll never have to work again. He started towards the market where he thought he would sell that wonderful turquoise. And he hadn't walked far when he saw a neighbor leading a horse by a rope. Good morning, Mimi Haley Haley. How are you? Don't ask how Mimi Haley Haley is. Ask me what's been happening to me, to tell you my story. I was digging in my garden, in my field, and I dug up this enormous turquoise. And as he was showing it to the man with the horse, he felt the weight of it. And he turned to the owner of the horse and he said, I'd like to propose a trade. Give me your horse and I'll give you this turquoise. Well, the man with the horse thought, maybe Haley's been in the sun too long. He could buy 100 dozen horses with this turquoise. Mimi Haley was getting impatient. Do we have a deal or not? And 5 minutes later, that man walked off very, very happy with his trade. But Mimi Haley was even happier. He shouted to the birds, today, good fortune has smiled on Mimi Haley. I am so, so happy. He walked along, and before long, he met a man leading an ox. And it was the same thing all over again. How are you, Mimi Haley? Don't ask how I am. Let me tell you a story. I was digging in my garden. I found a turquoise. I traded the turquoise for a horse, and I would like to trade you this horse for an ox. It was an old, worn-down ox, and the owner of the ox thought that Haley must be the biggest fool in the world. He agreed immediately. And now Haley walked off with the ox, shouting to the clouds, good fortune has smiled on Mimi Haley today. I am so, so lucky. Now, as the story goes, he next met a man with a ram or a goat. He traded the ox for the goat. He traded the goat for a rooster. And grandfather Mimi Haley Haley was walking along holding that rooster under his arm or cradled to his chest when he heard a song. And that song brought joy, joy, joy to his heart. It was sublime. Oh, he thought, oh, if only I could learn to sing that song. And just then a young man approached him. He was the young man singing that song. Everybody knew Mimi Haley Haley. How are you, Mimi Haley Haley? Don't ask how I am. Ask what happened to me today. I was digging in my field. I unearthed a wonderful turquoise. I traded the turquoise for a horse, the horse for an ox, the ox for a goat, the goat for this rooster. And I love that song that you're singing. Please, please take the rooster and teach me the song. The young man would have gladly taught Mimi Haley Haley the song without the rooster. But he took the rooster in exchange and taught Mimi Haley Haley how to sing that song. Mimi Haley Haley didn't go to the market that afternoon. He went back home shouting to anybody and everybody who could hear, today, good fortune smiles on Mimi Haley Haley. I am the happiest man in the world. I like to think that Mimi Haley Haley is still singing that song. In fact, I'm sure he's still singing that song. Uh, I've also learned that Dingbo and Dangbo are also characters in Bhutanese folktales, and they say that if Dingbo ever catches up with Dangbo, he's chasing him. If he ever catches up, there will be no more stories. Uh, a tiny little Nasruddin story to sort of keep the musical thread going here. Nasruddin was playing the oud one day. He was playing the same note over and over and over again all day long. And finally, his wife was just being driven to distraction. She tried to be polite. She said, "My dear husband, do you know that some people, when they play the oud, play notes that are higher than the note that you've been playing? And some people even play notes that are lower than the note that you have been playing." "I know that," said Nasruddin. "That's because they're trying to find this note." Well, here's another story about some notes. There, there was a writer best known for a book called The Outermost House. His name was Henry Beston. And I discovered that he wrote two books of basically his own inventions, fairy tales. Uh, the first book was published over 100 years ago, the next book a few years later. And I like to think about some of these stories that I have found sort of in lock cases or just about ready to be culled uh, from library collections. They're hard to find, and I think the stories aren't being told that often. When I think about three apples that fall for heaven, I think, well, there's the fourth apple too, which fell and maybe it was cold and not used. So I like to find some of these stories that are not being told as often. This is one of them. It's called The Wonderful Tune. Once upon a time, there was a young minstrel who earned his bread traveling up and down the land from the high places to the low places, the hard places, the soft places, the towns, the cities, the tents of the travelers, playing on his penny whistle for anybody or everyone who wanted to hear a tune. As he walked along one day, an interesting question came to him. He wondered, Is it possible? Is it possible that there is a tune that is so wonderful, so sublime, that if people hear it just once, they could never possibly be sad ever again? That question put a new spring in his step. And so now not only did he share his tunes with anyone who would care to hear one, he also shared his question. Now, some people thought he was there couldn't be such a tune. He was a fool, a charlatan. Some people even thought that he was a disturber of the peace. But more folks, even though they didn't think such a tune existed, wished him good luck on his journey and sent him off with their blessings. And so one day it happened that he came to a land, a town where the lord of that town had a court musician who was said to know every single tune that had ever been composed or played. And when the young minstrel heard that, his heart lit. It leaped. He thought, at last, I'm going to hear this song. He knocked on the door of the music master. He was dressed in rags, but the earnestness of his question fascinated the music master. He invited him in. Uh, the minstrel asked about the wonderful tune. Did he know it? Oh, I know many wonderful tunes. There's three of them that I'm thinking of that might just be the tune that you're seeking. And he sat down at his harpsichord, which was beautifully ornately decorated. And the three melodies that he played, beautiful as they were very ornamented with trills. And each time the young minstrel listened intently. They were beautiful, but something was missing. He shook his head. No, not the wonderful tunes. Uh, I know every tune that's ever been written. If none of these are the tune, perhaps this tune is just a figment of your imagination. Or perhaps it existed one day. Or maybe you're just on a fool's errand, lad. But he looked into the minstrel's eyes. He looked into his soul, and he saw he wasn't going to deter this young man from his quest. He said, I see that you won't be turned back. And I think what you must do is to make your way to the kingdom of music and make inquiries there. Put his arm around the young man's shoulders. He led him to the window. He says, look up at yonder mountain. He said, you see that small stream that's coming from the peaks? Follow it, follow it, follow it, follow it up and over the mountain pass and into the valley, and up over the next mountain pass and into that valley. And you'll come at last to the kingdom of music. Well, the seasons passed. It was a long and arduous trip. But eventually, on a beautiful spring day, the minstrel arrived in the kingdom of music, and there, everything was music. The birds sang more tunefully, the crickets chirped more merrily, the wind played melodies through the rustling leaves, and every man, woman, and child, babies accepted, either played a musical instrument or played or sang in the king's choir. And the king was delighted to hear that a minstrel had come into the land. Well, the pilgrim of the tune, as I like to call him, wasted no time in asking the king about the wonderful tune, if he had ever heard of such a tune. And the king grew very sad. He thought, yes, he said, the wonderful tune, we had it here. And everyone was happy as a lark every day of the year. But something happened. We don't know what. but the tune was broken, it was lost, the notes were scattered, and no one has heard that wonderful tune since. The minstrel immediately said, "Well, I'll be the one to gather the scattered notes." And the king shook his head. "Ah, my boy," I thought, "many have tried. Many have come back as broken old men. Some came back in their youth discouraged. Some never came back at all. But again, you know how these stories go. Once a quest like this starts, it's going to continue. I will be the one, no matter how long it takes, to find those scattered notes and bring them back." "Yes," said the king. "Yes, Godspeed. And when you do, we will put them together into the melody, and the world will be glad again." And without further delay, the minstrel continued his travels and his quest. 7 long years passed, 7 years. And the now no longer such young minstrel did not find one single note of the wonderful tune. One winter day found him in a storm, the wind blowing, the ice stinging his eyes, the snow piling up around his feet. He couldn't take another step. He fell exhausted and unconscious into a snowbank. When he woke up, he was in a comfortable feather bed, a cup of hot milk next to him, and an anxious looking young couple looking over him. They were coming back. They were coming back from a fair, found him in the snowbank, and nursed him back until he was conscious again. The first thing he asked, of course, after thanking them, was about the wonderful tune, the notes of the wonderful tune. And the young wife said, "A note? You know, there might just be one of the notes here." She went to the mantel. There was an old wooden bowl there. She brought it to him. And there it was, right in that bowl. The first note of the wonderful tune. A note made of the love between that young couple. And now I'll tell you how all but the last note was found. Uh, the next note he found in the book of a scholar that looked for wisdom all through the world. And another note was found, in a nest of a bird that had an old abandoned nest that had fallen out of a tree. But there it was, a note of comfort, protection. Another note he found in a child's toy, a note of uh, innocence and joy and wonder. He found another one of the notes, excuse me, he found another one of the notes in a farmer's field as he passed by. It was a freshly plowed field, and there in the very earth itself was the sound of life. Another one of the notes of the wonderful tune. Another note was found in the weavings of a poor but simple weaver, but it was a beautiful simple cloth, a note of beauty. He found another note in a castle of a prince that ruled his land with justice and compassion. And in another note he found in the chest of a sailor who had brought it back from one of his adventures. It was a note of adventure and discovery. But still there was one note missing, and so the quest continued. And in time, the pilgrim of the tune came to the land of the Blue Lakes, ruled by the lady Amor Et. and her name is a little hint about what that land was like. In the land of the Blue Lakes, every day was a fiesta, a festival. Every hour had its pleasure. Every pleasure had its hours. And Queen Amoret was delighted to welcome a musician to join in the festivities, especially a strong man who'd been out in the open air. She welcomed him. Of course, he asked about the note, that last note of the wonderful tune. She, oh, that note. We have that note here. I'll give it to you in good time. But first, come play with us. Enjoy yourself. And all his protests that he wanted to hear that note right away fell on deaf ears. She said, my jester has it. He keeps it in his little hut deep in the woods. I know where it is, but nobody else can find it. It's safe. Stay with us. You'll have it. Well, Lady Amoret did everything that she could to drown out the minstrel's memory of that note. I mean, it's just in a constant tide of amusements. But of course, we all know he's not going to forget about that note. He made attempts to find the fool's bower in his cabin. He got lost, he got tangled. And one day, Lady Amoret discovered that he had been sneaking off trying to find the note. She grew angry. She told the captain of her guard to go to the fool's hut to find the note and to throw it in the deepest lake in the land of Blue Lakes. And the minstrel heard the guards talking. His heart sank. It sank to think that after all this effort, the note was going to be destroyed and the tune left unplayed, the note, that last note. That night, there was a great storm brewing, and he remembered that the fool sometimes slept in the castle garret, and without haste, he bounded up the stairs, barged into the room without knocking, and almost trembling, told the fool what was about to happen. And the fool, dressed in his motley, only smiled. He said, ah, the wonderful tune. I've always believed in the wonderful tune, and you have no need to worry because I have been keeping that note safe. And he took off his cap, and there it was, the last note of the wonderful tune. Take it, go back to the kingdom of music, find the music masters, put the notes together, make the world glad again, leave right now. And as cold and windy as it was on that rainy night, the minstrel left with his heart glowing, just glowing with the knowledge that soon the world would be glad again. And how long it took him to make that journey back to the kingdom of music, I don't know. But when he did arrive, the king was overjoyed, absolutely overjoyed to know that he had come. Come, lad, come on. I'll gather my music masters. We'll put the notes together. The king called for the organist, the harpist, the violinist, and all through the night. The minstrel took out the notes one by one, and there they were. The note of love from the young couple's house, the note of protection, comfort from the nest, notes of beauty, the notes of the living earth itself, the notes of wisdom, the note of wisdom, the note of justice, the note from the toy, from the child's toy of innocence and joy. And the last note, maybe the most important note, the fool's note, the note that I think of as the note of chaos to complete the tune. Late into the night, they tried all the different combinations of the notes. And they continued the next day and into the next night. And finally, they had the melody. They had the melody of the beautiful tune, the wonderful tune. But then some controversy arose. One of the music masters thought, well, those last 5 bars should be played andante. No, no, allegro, said the violinist. The king had opinions of his own. And so they continued, and they still continue to debate just how the beautiful tune should be played. But one day, perhaps they'll agree, and we will all have the joy of hearing that beautiful tune played again for the first time in all these years. And just think how happy we will all be. Thanks, everybody.
Oh, Bob, thank you so much. Those were beautiful stories. And I love the idea of the quest to find the song. And I think that there's beauty in hearing the song, and we can hope that we will. And I think we can also keep searching for it our own selves and see what we can find.
But there's one of the questions I like to ask people, and for another time, or to sleep on it is, what are your notes? If you think about what would make a beautiful tune, what notes would you add?
Yeah, there's a lot to think about with that. So thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
And so we've begun with a Feast of Stories, and it will continue with a story by Renu Narayan.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much, Dana, for introducing me. And I was actually wondering which story I should share today. Both the stories written by myself. One was I shared last week on the Australian Association of Storytellers. But I think I'll share this one. She is the only one who probably has heard this before. Actually, I've written this to go with the theme, World Storytelling Day, Deep Water. So I'd like you all to tell me whether this goes along with the theme or not. So here goes. Murli walked into his house. He opened the door and looked up at the clock. 6:30, the usual time he reached home every day. He removed his shoes, put down his bag, and just as he was going inside, his phone began to ring. He took out his phone. Vignesh? He answered it. Hi, Vignesh. What's up? Murli, my dog has just littered. 2 puppies only. Would you like to adopt one? Why suddenly? All these years, Vignesh? No, I've never had puppies before. We normally get our dogs spayed or neutered, but this time we made a mistake. Just 2 puppies. Would you like to adopt one? I know you've always wanted one. Okay, I'll drop in tomorrow evening and perhaps have a look, and then I'll decide. Okay? Bye, Vignesh. Bye. Murli went inside. Ma, come inside, Murli. Come inside. There's something for you to eat here. So Murli went in. There was already a meal laid out for him. He normally ate early. He finished it and then walked into the kitchen. His mom was nowhere to be seen. His dad was there. So, did you like the food, Murli? Yes, Dad, it was good. You made it? Yes, I made it. Your mom's out in the garden. So he walked out, had a chat with his mother, read a book for a while and went to sleep. The next evening, as soon as he finished work, he dropped in at Vignesh's house, which wasn't too far away from his. Hi, Murli. Finally, come. Vignesh opened the door. Where are the puppies? Asked Murli. He loved dogs, but he had never had one before. As a child, he had always begged his parents for a pup. But both his parents had worked and he had gone to school. So they had always said, none of us are going to be at home to look after a little one. So forget about it. Maybe when you're older. And it had never happened. And now, as an adult, someone who was financially independent, continued living with his parents. Most Indian children did that, even though they were young adults, older adults. But Murli did it not because of compulsion. He did it out of choice. He was the only child and he loved his parents very much. He didn't want to leave them alone, though they were not that old. Come into the garden, said Vignesh. And so they both walked out. And there they were, the mother and the two puppies. One was tan, the other was brown. Murli whistled to them. The brown one looked at him like this and ran away. The tan one came running towards him. Tiny little thing. And put his paws on his pant, trying to reach up. So Murli bent down and picked up the puppy. And she gave him a lick on the nose. I think I'll take this one, he said. But Murli, she's a girl. So what? Gender doesn't matter. In any case, she chose me. Obviously, the other one's a male. He didn't want anything to do with me. And Murli smiled. Okay, your choice, said Vignesh. And as soon as they went back into the house, Vignesh's mother said, Hi, Murli. It's been years since I saw you. Would you like a cup of coffee or something? No, it's fine. I don't want anything, Auntie, because I have to go back home and have my dinner. Okay, bye, guys. He put the puppy into a little seat that he had brought, a little box, in his car, and he went back home. As soon as he entered, he said, Ma, Pa, see what I brought. Both the parents came out. A new addition to the family, huh? I'm sure you adopted her. Yes, I have. How do you like her? Oh, she's very, very cute, his mother said, coming forward and picking her up. What have you decided to name her? Sabapati, said Murli. Sabapati? But that doesn't really suit a girl, does it? It means leader of the group, and she is a leader, said Murli. And that was that. 2 years went by. Sabapati had grown up. Long legs, big ears, a long snout, big nose, black, really naughty eyes. She looks to be a mix of a hound, something like that, I think, said Murli one day, looking down at her. She could jump up really high. Sometimes they were so scared that she would scale right over the wall and run away, but she never did that. 2 years, I said. Well, that was when Murli met the second love of his life, Jyoti. She was a corporate trainer, and she had come over to his office, the first training. When he walked into his office, he saw this young woman. She had short, curly hair, dusky complexion, a crooked nose, but sharp, twinkling black eyes. Not somebody you'd call traditionally beautiful, but she stole Murli's heart at first sight. They chatted for a while, and then Jyoti left to do her training. Murli sat there thinking, what do I do about this? But days went by. He didn't really pluck up his courage to ask her out. After the training was over one evening, he said, Jyoti, would you like to come out for coffee with me? Why not? Said Jyoti. And so they went out. And this went on for several evenings. And finally, Jyoti expressed her love for him. And so they decided to get married. Unfortunately, both the parents, Jyoti's as well as Murli's, didn't agree with the match because they didn't belong to the same community. Well, it didn't matter to them. And so they got married in a small temple with just a small family for attending. Sabapati from Murli's side and Joe's sister from her side. Now that they were married, they moved into a small house, very close to the beach. That's where all of them lived. Sabapati loved to go out there and play on the beach. After marriage, Joe wasn't too happy with Sabapati. You know why? Because every morning, as soon as she woke up, Murli would be missing from the bed. He would have taken Sabapati for a long walk. She was jealous of Sabapati. Another woman in Murli's life, who would like it? How do I get rid of her? She thought to herself several times. The opportunity rose a few months later when she found that she was pregnant. She told Murli, Murli, I don't really like the idea of having a dog in the house. You know, with the baby coming, what if babies, allergic to the dog? Come off it, Joe. Sabapati is a part of our family. Please remember, she's the first child, my first child. And children are definitely not allergic to dogs. And in fact, they grow up to be very, very compassionate if they grow up with dogs. Please, I'm not giving Sabapati away. That's what you're trying to do. Jyoti gave up. She really wished she could do something. As the days went by and Jyoti's stomach became bigger and bigger, Murli noticed that she was very, very unhappy. She hardly spoke. And so he felt sad. This wasn't the kind of mood she should be in when she was pregnant. So one evening he called up Vignesh. Vignesh, yes, Murli, could you please take Sabapati for a few months? Just for a few months. I'm not giving her away. Just till the baby is born. And once she's born, I'll convince Joe to take her back. Sure, of course, drop her off, said Vignesh. And so Sabapati was out of the house. And this made Joe very happy. Now she's all back to smiles. And Murli was also happy. After all, her pregnancy and their child was important. She was 8 months pregnant. She had taken off from work now. And every evening, the doctor advised her to go for a long walk. Murli was still at work. And so she went for a long walk. She was walking up and down the street, very close to the beach. It was getting darker, but she was not scared. After all, it was her familiar area. All the neighbors were a little away from each other, and the people are all inside the house, probably lighting lamps or having their dinner. As Jyoti kept walking, she heard footsteps coming from behind. She turned around casually. It was a young man, and suddenly he reached out his hand and yanked at Joe's chain. She held on to it. No, she shouted. Help! But nobody heard her. The chain was precious. It was her chain that Murli had tied around her neck when they got married. It's called the Tali in India. Mangal Sutra in the north and Tali in the south. I'm not giving my chain, she screamed. But the man just pushed her down and continued to yank at the chain. Ah! Jyoti yelled because she landed almost on her stomach. But somebody heard. 2 sharp ears. Sabapati was over the wall in a jiffy and ran towards the familiar voice. And she could see that Jyoti was on the road. She jumped up on the man. The man said, oh, and he ran away for his life. Sabapati stood next to Jyoti wondering what she could do. But she couldn't talk, she couldn't shout, but she did the only thing she could. Ooh! She howled and howled and howled louder and louder till somebody opened their door and said, what's wrong with this dog? And then they saw, oh no, there's somebody on the road. And they all came running out. It's Joe, one of them shouted. By the time the ambulance came, Jyoti had lost consciousness. Sabapati went quietly back to Vignesh's house. Jyoti was rushed to hospital. The news reached Murli, and he too went with his heart aflutter, wondering what news he would hear. Jyoti was in the emergency ward. And when he walked in, she was just regaining consciousness. Murli, the baby. Everything's fine, Jyoti, everything's fine. We've just taken a scan, baby's fine. Only thing, probably the baby's going to come out very soon. Yes, my water broke. And I think I'm starting the contractions, Jyoti said, holding on to her stomach. And she said, but Murli, yes. What about Sabapati? Is she okay? Yes, she's fine. She's fine, Jyoti. Don't worry about any of that. Let's just concentrate on having the baby, okay? Okay? Yeah, hold my hand, Murli. And he held on. As soon as the doctor came, he said, I need to go out now, Joe. No, you can stay, said the doctor. And so Murli watched his wife struggling with labor pains till the baby was out. The doctor handed over the baby to Murli, and Murli held on to her. He was now the father of a beautiful baby girl. Oh, my darling, he said, and he looked down at her. Yet another woman to adore. As he looked down at the baby, Jyoti said, Murli? Yes, Joe. Please bring Sabapati back. I want our daughter to grow up with her. She said, tears rolling down her cheeks. Murli's heart was full. He kissed the baby gently, and tears started coming down his cheeks. 3 women back in his life. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Renu. What a beautiful story. And your animals are always amazing. So thank you for bringing Sapapati to life for all of us. And so our next story will be brought to us by Jane Cole. Jane?
Hello. Think North Sacramento, 1958. We lived on Grove Avenue. Across the street was a field with a little creek running through it. It went through 2 big culverts under the street to our side. On our side of the street, you could walk down the little sidewalk and walk through the culverts. You could make it through and keep your feet dry if you walked with your feet out on the sides of the cement culvert. That's if you were as small as me, which was about 6 years old. On our side of the street was another big field just down from our houses. We lived in a fairly new subdivision. As a kid, I could tell it was fairly new because the trees were not really big, but big enough for me to climb in. On our side of the street, there was a big field, and as I said, on the other side of the street, another big field. If you were flying over it, it would look like, our area would look like sort of a crazy patchwork quilt of subdivision and field and subdivision and field. Now, in the field on our side of the street, down the street quite a ways, was a really rickety, ragged, weathered, patched up old gray shack of a house. The most interesting thing about that house was who lived in it. Well, the people who lived in it had these 3 things. One, they nailed dead fish to the outside of the walls in fairly orderly rows. Those fish were so disgusting. They smelled so bad. That stink passed out over the fields. It was mythic in the neighborhood. The second most interesting thing about this family was that the mother and the 2 boys shoplifted at the grocery store. We saw them do it. My sister Karen and I were shocked. We were indignant. We just couldn't understand it. Our parents tried to explain to us. This family was dealing with some major problems, and they didn't have a lot of money. My sister and I thought, well, we're so broke, we don't even get to have coins for the gumball machine or the mechanical horse that you could ride out in front of the store. And we don't steal anything. Our parents went on to explain, well, the thing is, the mother and the boys at that time, my parents said, they aren't right in the head. And the father would come once a week into the local grocery store, and he would pay for whatever the grocers thought that the mother and the boys stole. We still thought that was just unacceptable. And my dad sat us down and said, you know, girls, that father is doing the best he can. The third interesting thing about that family was that the two boys, as far as Karen and I could tell, they didn't go to school at all. So that was the house of the stinking fish. And it was scary. And our parents did say, you are not to go near that house. You stay away. That was not hard to do. It was easy to stay away from that house because of the overpowering stench of the fish. Well, my route to school involved walking along the street near that house. It was set back in the field a little bit. At this time, my mom got a job substitute teaching, and my little sister was not in school yet. So Karen went to the babysitters, but I had to walk to school by myself. I was expected to, and I was a first grader. Now, this is the part of the story where you can see how perhaps I went a little far afield, so to speak. Walking past the house of this incredibly stinky fish, it came to me that if I just went across the street and into the other big field, I could take a shortcut to school. And so I did. Now, in this field, the little creek ran along, and I would zigzag, jumping that creek back and forth, back and forth. If I took a run, I could just make the leap. Now, sometimes the bank on the other side was a little higher than the bank I was on, and I might hit the bank, fall to my knees, and skid down the bank back towards the creek. Sometimes it was a little bit muddier or mushier on the other side, and sploosh, my feet would land in the mud. On one occasion, when I was taking this circuitous, zigzaggy route through the field to get to school, it was probably, well, spring, definitely, and the grass was either wet with dew or with tule fog, and I was jumping and zigzagging my way back and forth and stopping to look at the little miniature rapids in the stream or the little tiny beaches that formed here and there. There were frogs, and there were pollywogs, and there were red-winged blackbirds that were flying up out of the grass. There were all kinds of plants that were so fascinating, and wildflowers were starting to bloom. And it was a little cold that day. And when I finally emerged from the other side of that big field and my foot hit the pavement, I had two realizations. One, I was late for school. There were no kids out there anywhere. And two, I was missing a shoe. I had no idea that shoe was gone. I had been everywhere in that field, and until my foot hit that cold, dark, blacktop pavement, I had no idea. Well, then I was faced with, should I try to go back and find my shoe? And I knew it was impossible. I would never find my shoe. The grass was as high as my waist. How would I find my shoe? So I just walked on into class. Now, I don't remember if I was diddle dumpling my son John, one shoe off and one shoe on all day long. I don't think I was required to tell a story about this adventure. I don't think any excuses were asked for or explanation. I think that the mud on my face and my hands and my knees, the soaked hem of my dress and the mud on my one shoe and my little white socks told the story for itself. Now, we were broke, so I know losing one of those shoes for my mom was a minor tragedy. I know for myself it was slightly bigger tragedy because they were my favorite kind of ballerina-like shoes. Well, alas, the shoe was never found. And that's the end of my story.
Thank you, Jane. And I'm sorry you didn't get a chance to tell the story in class because they missed a really good story. And thank you for sharing it with us tonight. And so our next story will come to us from Rupa Mohan.
Namaste, good evening to all. I would like to tell you a story that I just came up with, so it's really brand new. I want to start by telling you that we grew up in India often hearing this dictum from our epics and our ancient texts. Atiti Devo Bhava, which means guests are divine or like gods. Yes, guests. And we also heard stories about how guests would show up, especially sages and saints, and even the poorest of folks would have to wash their feet and treat them like royalty and feed them and take care of them. Well, we didn't go that far when I was growing up in Chennai or Madras, but my grandparents' house was always an open house. People would show up, of course, unannounced. They would come and stay for a few hours or a few days without any prior warning. And my grandmother would go into the kitchen and cook up something really fast and also indulge them with cups and cups of pure Madras filter coffee. You know, as little children, we were supposed to come and pay our respects and say hello and be civil to these guests, which was fine until I was a teenager and I thought, why do I have to do this? Especially when some of those aunties and uncles would start prying and asking me about my school work and, just extremely curious. So I would sometimes lock myself up in my room and pretend that I was really busy. Well, as time went on, it was just the same. And my mother started doing this. So I guess it was a family tradition, like most Indian households, to be 100% hospitable. Well, when I got married, I had a chance to extend this hospitality. My husband, who had come from the US to get married, suddenly announced soon after our honeymoon in India that two of his friends, two young ladies who had gone to business school with him, were circumnavigating the world just for fun and we're going to drop in to see us in Madras. And he also announced that he had told them they can come and stay in his parents' house for a few days rather than go into a hotel. So just like how in Downton Abbey, do you remember when they prepared for the royals to arrive? We all got into motion because, of course, we didn't have a crew of helpers, but we had to get the house ready, my in-laws' house, for these two young ladies so that they would be very comfortable. And they came, and for 4 days, we just gave them the best time. We took them out to see the beautiful shore temple close to Chennai called Mamallapuram. We took them out to eat and try all the local cuisines, while my mother-in-law was also cooking up a storm at home. And the last thing, we took them to a sari shop and bought them these beautiful saris, which they draped around their bodies, and they looked like goddesses. Remember, Atiti Devo Bhava? Yes, treat your guests like gods and goddesses. That's exactly what we were doing then. So they were very happy. They left saying that, oh, you guys should come and visit us in Manhattan. We are going to start working there. We are going to be roommates, and we will show you the Big Apple. I was very happy because the following year, after I moved to San Francisco, my husband, of course, took me to the East Coast to show me all the sights. And we were staying with the family in New Jersey. And he said, Rupa, call these ladies, and at least let's drop by to see them. And so remember, that was the time of landlines. So I picked up the phone and I called, and one of them answered. And she said, we are just so busy. We're just, we can't talk right now. Can you call back later? So I called back later, and then one of them said, we are just about to take the elevator. Can't talk to you right now. So that was the end of it. We never got to see them again. I was disappointed because I was hoping to see the way these ladies lived. It was fascinating. They were these single women, successful and bright and independent. But I missed the opportunity to get a peek into their life and also be shown around the Big Apple by them. But I came to terms with it, thinking people in America have very busy lives and they don't have time to follow this old dictum, treat your guests like gods. That's just it's outdated possibly. And also I remember the other saying from the Gita, Bhagavad Gita, a holy text, which says, do your duty without any expectations. So the next few decades, I couldn't be like my grandmother, but I tried my best, being hospitable and entertaining and family and friends, but trying not to go overboard like they used to in the good old times. Now, of course, people did not come unannounced. They would, let me know ahead so that I could plan and prepare. Except about a decade ago, I was going to encounter some uninvited guests. Every night, being a night owl, I was the only one who would stay up, and I would hear these crazy noises coming from the kitchen behind a wall. And I couldn't figure out what that was, but I wanted to crack this case. So I would take a flashlight and go looking for the intruder. But this would go on for about half an hour, and all kinds of weird sounds that I had never encountered before. And it was all coming from that one spot behind the wall. Well, And then a few days later, I saw evidence. I opened the cupboard close to it, and there, where I had stashed my delicious and favorite Indian snacks, which I had hand carried from India recently, they came in these bags that were completely sealed. Guess what? I saw those bags were open, and those things were all over the place, along with the dreaded D word, droppings. Oh, I knew that some rodents were up to no good. And then came the big question. How do we catch these rodents? Well, my family, especially my young daughters, wanted us to be humane and stay away from the sticky traps that guaranteed good results, according to all my friends. What do we do? And I recall my grandmother, the brave one in our family back home in Chennai, used to take a broom and literally chase such rodents out of her storeroom where all the grains were kept. And sometimes she would get these special traps where these rodents would get caught but not injured. So it was like a catch and release. She would send that off to a faraway spot with the gardener in a sack, and these creatures would be released. Even the bigger rodents called bandicoots, which seem to love our garden. Oh, should we do that? I was agonizing over it, and suddenly something occurred to me. Now, are these unwanted guests, or are we unwanted guests? After all, our house was built on an old ranch where the mice and rats and other rodents lived freely and enjoyed the beautiful countryside. And now we had all these buildings come up and they had to be dislodged. So they were perhaps coming back to check out their old haunts and incidentally getting a little hungry and wanting a little snack. So what was wrong in that, I thought? After all, a few years ago, I had gone back with my daughters in search of my old ancestral home where my grandparents had lived. And I had gone looking for it. Unfortunately, it had been converted into a big shopping complex. And I didn't see any trace of that beautiful old house or garden. Perhaps these rodents feel the same way about coming here and looking for some sign of their old abode. So I thought, let us try to practice the old dictum, Atiti Devo Bhava, and be kind to these creatures. Or perhaps they should be kind to us and let us live there happily ever after. Thank you.
Thank you, Rupa. That is a marvelously broad-minded story, and I did not foresee the twist at all. I had just been thinking that I don't tend to get uninvited guests, but I do get uninvited and, thanks to my cats, unwilling four-legged guests fairly often. So I will try to follow your example and think of them as kindly. So next we have not a story, but words that are as important as any story could be, from Sarah Armstrong.
Oh, thank you, Dana. And thank you all. This is such a lovely gathering as usual. Just lovely, just lovely. Thank you. Well, it's my pleasure to be able to talk with you tonight about a special new award that SAC board has put in place. And that is to provide lifetime membership to very special people, to our folks who've been involved with us for many years, and pioneers and spirit holders and story promoters. And Sally Holzman is our very first honoree. So again, I would just want to thank Sally for all her good work, all the many years, congratulate her on all the work that she's done, thank her so much for all the work, and I'm just so pleased to be able to present this lifetime membership in SAC to Sally. Thank you.
Thank you, Sal. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Sally. Sorry, I'm not. And I actually would like to invite everyone to come off of mute. And on the count of 3, we will all say thank you to Sally, for we all have so many things to thank her for. So on the count of 1, 2, 3.
Thank you,
Sally.
For everything.
Thank you.
so much.
Oh, she was here. I think she is here still. Oh no, she was just admitted. So actually let's check. We'll give it a minute for her to get her sound hooked up. And honestly, I think thanking Sally twice is really still nowhere near enough. And so we'll do it a second time. And I'll just check to make sure that she's, yes. Okay, so we'll try it again on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3.
Thank you,
Thank
Sally.
Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, all right. Thank you. And yeah, I'm actually the next teller who had signed up. And I'm of two minds. As I had mentioned, there's a story that I'm working on that is, yeah, I don't know if it would be introducing a different note into the evening, but with your permission, I'll give it a try, and feedback is welcome. And yeah, so some of you may be familiar with the Irish hero Finn McCool, and of course his band of warriors, the Fianna. And this story begins one morning. Finn and the Fianna were, as often happened, getting ready to go off to battle. And just as they were getting ready to leave their encampment, one of the Fianna, Cale, was not getting ready to leave camp, but was walking back into it. And so Finn said, "Cale, where have you been?" And he said, "Well, I went to go see the woman who raised me." "And why did you go see the woman who raised you?" Cale said, "Because I am thinking of marriage. I had a dream last night. I saw a woman of the she. I saw Creha." "You know," said Finn, "that Creha is the most deceitful of all the women in Ireland. She has gotten her hands on almost every beautiful, wondrous thing in the land. And you know that if anyone goes and tries to marry her, she demands that they sing a song that describes everything she has in her house." "I know," said Cale. "And so I went to go see the woman who raised me, and she told me what I needed to do." Well, Finn could see he was smitten, and so the entire war band set out together. And they went over the stony hills. They went through the wet valleys until they came to the hill of the she. And they knocked on the door with their golden spears. And the door opened, and out stepped Creha with 3 times 50 female attendants. And Finn said, "We have come to speak to you of marriage." "And who is it who wishes to marry me?" said Creha. "Cale, the son of kings, the killer of 100 men." "I've heard of him," said Creha, "but I've never seen him. Does he have a poem for me?" "I do," said Kale. And he stepped forward and he sang her a song. And his song, it told of everything there was in her house, all the wonderful things she had collected, willingly or unwillingly, from various places around Ireland. It told of the people who were in the house whom she loved. But it wasn't just the accuracy of the song. It was that he sang of these things with love, with wonder. He sang as one who could see the beauty in these things, as Creha herself could see their beauty. And her heart was moved. And so that day, they were married. They celebrated the wedding for 7 days. And then, well, Cale remained one of the Fianna. And so he set out. And there were various adventures. But then one day, the world sang out to Creha that the Fianna had engaged in a terrible battle. The wind sobbed, telling of the fights by the sea. The stones grieved for the warriors who had fallen. The crows, the cries of the armies cast a cloak over the sun. The clouds rolled in, and the hounds and the crows and the witches in the valleys and the wolves of the forest howled from every quarter. And Creha, she set out to find her beloved. And it's very rough, as I said. And as she was searching, she passed through a marsh, and in the marsh she saw a heron, and it had 2 nestlings, and a fox was watching. And the crane would put out her wings to protect one of her young ones, and the fox would dart at the other, and she would put out her wing to protect that nestling, and the fox would dart at the other. And Creha said to herself, "Is it any wonder that I should feel distress at the fate of my beloved when even this crane is distressed at the fate of her children?" And she continued on, and she walked further, and she came to the hills, and she heard a stag bellowing in sorrow. For 9 years it had walked those hills with its doe. The doe had been slain by a hunter, and for 19 days the stag had gone without grass, without water, cutting. And she said, "Is it any wonder that I mourn for my beloved when the stag is cutting his own life short out of grief?" And she continued on. She came to the shore where the battle had been, and there she met with Fergus of the True Lips, who saw all that had happened and spoke the truth. "Have you news of Cale for me, Fergus?" she asked. And he said, "I do. For Cale and the last man left of the opposing army went out into the sea together, and there they drowned. And at that time the waves had brought Cale back onto the shore, and the men and the women who brought him in. And Creha walked to him, and she fell to her knees, and she keened and she cried, and she sang a song of all the grief the world held. She sang of the crane and his children. She sang of the stag and the doe. She sang of the sorrowful waves that had carried her beloved to shore, and she sang of her own grief. And as she finished her lament, she laid herself down And it seemed to her that all the beauty, all the wonder of the world was lost, and her spirit left it behind. And now, when I will be telling this story, or when it's polished, I will tell it again. It will be followed by a song that will tell us of part of what Bob's story reminded us of, that there is in this world never just one no. That it is always more than one, even if it seems to us that one note perhaps drowns out the rest. And so thank you for listening through a very rough draft of the story. And yeah, and happily, we do not have to end on a tragic note, because we have had 2 volunteers. We probably have time for one story because I did go a little bit long. So we'll close with a story from Manjiri. Thank you. And actually, if anyone has any feedback about mine, to be greedy, please feel free to put it in the chat. It was very rough. But Manjiri, please, thank you for sharing a story with us tonight. Actually, Manjiri, I don't think we can't hear you. Oh,
Can you hear me now?
yes.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Manjiri Gopte, and I'm telling from Mumbai, India. Today's story is a very old Japanese folk tale, and here goes. There was an old man who lived with his 3 sons, and their house was up on the hill far away from the village. He wanted to get good brides, girls who were hardworking and beautiful for his sons. And he searched near and far away. And in the next village, he found 2 girls who were beautiful and from good families. And 2 of his sons got married to them. They were lovely girls and they looked after the home very well. They loved their husbands and their father-in-law, who they treated like their own father. But they used to love going to their parents' home too, which was in the next village. And many a times they would go there and stay for a few days. Every time they left, the old father-in-law would be upset. He would really miss them. And so next time they asked for permission to go, he told them, you go, but on one condition. You have to get me 2 presents. And one of them is fire in paper, and the second one is wind in paper. So they agreed and they left for their parents' home. But they were a bit worried, and they started thinking that how is this possible? Where do we get these presents for our father-in-law? They loved him dearly and they didn't want to disappoint him. So on the way, they were really worried and started weeping. And they met a lady who was tending to her cows. And she said, what happened? And they told her the problem. She said, don't worry, you go to your parents' house, enjoy yourself. On the way back, you meet me, I will give you what you want. So they were relieved. They went and had a good time. And then after a few days, returned. They met her again, this lady who was tending to her cows, and asked her eagerly, what is it you have for us? So she said, look, take this fan. This is wind in paper, and show it to your father. And she also gave a box with a candle in it and said, this is fire in paper. They were so happy and so grateful to her. They took the two things and went to their father-in-law. He saw the presents and he was so thrilled. And he said, "Did you get them all by yourself?" The two girls admitted that they had the help of another girl who they had met. He said, "Let's call her home. I want to meet her." So then they called her home, and he was so impressed by her intelligence that they asked her, he told her that he would love to get his third son married to her. And so they both got married, and being the intelligent and hardworking one, she made sure that she made their home very happy and prosperous. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Manjeri. And what a beautiful story of the wonder of ordinary objects if we just have the eyes to see them. So thank you. All right, and amazingly, we have already come to the end of our time together. So I thank everyone who told. I thank Marnie for being our tech host. And Bob, thank you again for joining us this evening. It was a wonderful set of stories. And yeah, I look forward to seeing everyone again next month so we can. I'll stop the recording.